Have you ever woken up one day and realized the world feels eerily still, like someone turned the volume down on reality? You go outside and everything looks the same, the streets, the sky, your coffee in hand. But inside, something's changed. You don't feel the rush of anxiety that used to fill the silence. You don't feel the hunger to become someone anymore. You're just here, awake, present, but almost confused by how quiet it all feels. If that sounds familiar, you might not be in the middle of a spiritual awakening. You might be at the end of it. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Psyphos Depth, where we dive deep into the invisible threads of your inner world and the quiet truths most people avoid. And let us know in the comments below. What moment in your life made you realize your spiritual awakening had changed you forever? Now, let's begin. There's something paradoxical about spiritual awakening. Everyone talks about the beginning, when everything bursts open and you're flooded with realization after realization, like a dam breaking inside your soul. It's messy, thrilling, frightening, and wildly beautiful. You see signs in every corner of life. Numbers repeat themselves like the universe is whispering your name. People leave your life suddenly. Others appear with uncanny timing. Your body vibrates differently. You question every assumption you've ever had. Everything means something. But no one talks about what happens when it's over. Not because it's less important, but because it's harder to explain. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with stillness. It doesn't look like epiphany. It looks like you folding laundry and suddenly realizing you're at peace. No high, no drama, just quiet knowing. And that is strange, because after months, sometimes years of spiritual intensity, silence can feel like something's wrong. You're no longer chasing answers. You're not asking the universe for signs every day. You're not downloading wisdom at 2 a.m. or crying under a full moon. You're not in pain anymore. But you're also not in ecstasy. You're just calm. That calm at first feels like boredom. You wonder if you've lost your connection. You go back and read your journals from the peak of your awakening. You miss the fire. You miss the intensity. You miss the divine drama. But that's the trap. We confuse awakening with emotion. We confuse insight with identity. We romanticize the chaos of transformation because it made us feel something big. But that was never the point. The point was to clear all of that, so you could finally sit in this ordinary moment and see it not as a step toward anything, but as enough. At the end of spiritual awakening, you begin to find the sacred in the mundane. You stop needing to decode the deeper meaning of every interaction. You stop measuring your growth by how many breakthroughs you've had. Instead, you begin noticing the warmth in your chest when you're making soup, the way your feet feel against the ground when you step outside barefoot, the way a stranger's smile can feel like a blessing that needs no explanation. That's when you know something real has shifted. Your nervous system is no longer wired for survival. You don't feel the same urgency to solve or fix or improve. You're not trying to ascend out of your humanity. You're descending into it. This is the strange beauty no one warned you about. When the awakening ends, life begins. Not the life you thought you needed, the career, the relationship, the clean aesthetic, but the life that always wanted you. You begin waking up with no agenda. You drink your coffee slower. You speak less, but say more. You sit through discomfort instead of fleeing from it. You stop trying to control outcomes, because your trust in the process isn't intellectual anymore. It's cellular. There's no lightning bolt. There's no final sign. Just a deep, abiding awareness that you are no longer trying to become. You are just being, and that is terrifying. Because we are not raised to be. We are raised to chase, to improve, to climb. Even in spirituality, we chase healing. We chase wholeness. We chase enlightenment. We want to be high vibrational every day. We want to attract perfect partners, align with soul missions, dissolve karma, and bypass the messiness of being human. But when the awakening ends, all of that falls away. You're not trying to heal anymore. You're just living from the place that healing revealed. You're not trying to be enlightened. You're just embodying lightness. You're not trying to fix your shadow. You've simply stopped fearing it. This is when you stop searching for teachers. You stop needing rituals. You might still love them, but they're not crutches anymore. You've internalized the wisdom. You've integrated the practice. You've become the very thing you were chasing. And that's where another strange thing happens. Grief. Yes, grief. Because now that you've exited the whirlwind, you have time to look back. You see the people who left, the versions of you that died, the illusions you had to destroy, the comfort you sacrificed. And it hits you not with drama, but with weight. You mourn what the awakening took from you. Even if it gave you more, the cost still lingers. You might cry unexpectedly while driving. You might feel a sudden wave of sadness as you fold a shirt from your old life. You might laugh at how seriously you took everything and then cry again because you had to take it seriously in order to break through. And in that grief, another paradox arises: peace. You begin to love your past self, not as a project you needed to fix, but as a sacred carrier of everything that led you here. You stop rejecting who you were. You honor the fear, the patterns, the missteps, because now you see that was the path. You stop judging your process. You stop comparing your journey. You stop rushing to the next revelation, because you know that the deepest wisdom arrives not when you seek it, but when you sit still long enough for it to find you. You stop trying to be spiritual, and you start becoming honest. And honesty is the final initiation. Not honesty with others, but with yourself. You begin asking real questions, not lofty ones, but human ones. Am I being true in this moment? Am I speaking from love or from fear? Am I staying in this situation because it feels aligned or because it feels familiar? Am I choosing this path because it nourishes me or because I'm afraid to be seen choosing differently? These questions don't come with judgment. They come with presence. They're not demands. They're invitations, gentle ones, sacred ones. And as you live into those questions, you realize that awakening was never meant to make you extraordinary. It was meant to make you real. You become more approachable, more grounded, more flexible. You laugh more. You cry more. You don't pretend to have it all together. You no longer fear being seen in your rawness. You've stopped performing. And people feel that. They feel your freedom. Not the kind that screams, "I'm free," but the kind that whispers, "You can be too." That's when strangers start telling you their stories. That's when people say they feel safe around you. Not because you're preaching, but because you've embodied your process. And in that embodiment, you begin to teach without trying. You begin to lead without pushing. You begin to guide without ego. Because now you know the truth. Spiritual awakening isn't a place you stay. It's a portal you pass through. And on the other side is this: your actual life, but lived from your actual self. And that self doesn't need to be seen, doesn't need to be validated, doesn't need to be rescued. That self is here, breathing, rooted, ready. And when someone asks you, "How do you know your awakening is over?" you smile, because you don't feel the need to answer anymore. You just keep living, in presence, in peace, in truth. And truth, quiet, sacred, unshakable, is now your baseline. When the seeking stops, something else begins. Something gentler, quieter, more integrated than anything that came before. It's not a revelation, it's a remembering. A kind of homecoming that happens not in one big burst, but in small, ordinary moments. Like sitting in the park and realizing you no longer feel the ache to prove yourself. Like turning off your phone without anxiety. Like being able to say no and not feel guilty about protecting your peace. And yet, this phase, the embodiment phase, can be the most disorienting. Because no one celebrates you here. There's no dramatic breakthrough, No emotional roller coaster, no cosmic downloads to share on social media. Just presence. Just a quiet heart beating in rhythm with the now. And at first, that stillness can feel like you've disappeared. You might even question whether you've gone backward. Where did the magic go? Where are the synchronicities, the intense dreams, the messages from the universe? Why does life suddenly feel normal again? But that's just it. This is the reward. The universe didn't abandon you. It trusted you enough to stop yelling. It no longer needs to shake your world to get your attention. It knows you're listening now. Not just when things are dramatic, but when they're simple. When you're brushing your teeth, watering the plants, walking the same path you've walked 1,000 times. But this time noticing the curve of the branch above your head, the pattern of light on the sidewalk, the bird song you used to ignore. You begin to feel into your own rhythm. You stop comparing your path to others. You're no longer performing a spiritual identity. You're just being, and being is where the integration begins. You stop waiting for the next big aha. You don't need to post your realizations online. You start valuing silence more than sharing. You begin to understand that sacredness isn't something you discover, it's something you carry. You are the ceremony now. Every breath is your prayer. Every moment your practice. You start to notice new boundaries forming, not out of fear, but out of clarity. You no longer tolerate conversations that drain your energy. You no longer say yes when your whole body says no. You don't argue with people who misunderstand you, not because you can't, but because it's no longer your job to be understood by everyone. Your peace has become more important than being right. And in that peace, you finally have space to feel what's true. You stop pretending certain relationships work when they don't. You stop showing up out of obligation. You let go of roles that no longer reflect who you've become. This doesn't always mean cutting people off. Sometimes it just means releasing the version of yourself that was attached to being needed. You begin to see how much of your former self was built on survival, on pleasing, on performing, on proving, and you grieve that. You honor that version of you because they tried. They held it together when everything was falling apart. They reached for healing, even when they didn't have the language for it. And without them, you wouldn't be here. But you're here now, and this you is different. Not better, not above, just more real. You still feel fear. You still get triggered. But now, you meet those parts of yourself instead of shaming them. You hold them like an old friend. You ask, "What are you trying to protect me from?" And often those parts don't need fixing. They just need space to breathe. And that space, that inner spaciousness, you begin to offer it to others too. You stop judging where others are on their journey. You see your past self in them. You soften. You become the kind of person who can sit with someone in pain without trying to fix it. You stop offering unsolicited advice. You stop rushing people to move on. You understand now that true healing isn't linear, and awakening doesn't make anyone immune to being human. You've stopped looking for perfection in yourself, in others, in life. You don't need everything to be clean and easy. You've made peace with the mess. You've learned to sit in the unknown without panicking, and that changes your relationship with time. You stop racing. You stop counting how long things are taking. You realize your life isn't a deadline. It's a rhythm, a pulse, a sacred unfolding. And you begin to trust that what's meant for you won't miss you, not because you manifested it perfectly, but because you're aligned. Alignment becomes more important than goals. Resonance becomes more important than plans. You choose people who feel like truth. You move toward what feels like home in your nervous system. You build slowly, intentionally, with presence. And you begin to notice that your outer world is catching up. Not because you forced it, but because your inner world has changed so completely that the old reality no longer sticks. You've raised your baseline, not in vibration, but in embodiment. You no longer accept what isn't real. You no longer pretend love is enough when it comes without respect. You no longer chase the shiny thing that doesn't feed your soul. You're not looking for fireworks anymore. You're looking for fire that stays lit. And that shift, it's everything. Because now, your life becomes an act of devotion. Not to any belief system, not to a rigid structure, but to the present moment. You live in dialogue with life. You co-create, not as a master manipulating matter, but as a partner in a dance. You say yes when it's time to say yes. You say no with grace. You let things come. You let things go. And the strangest thing happens. Joy. Not the performative kind, not the manic kind, but the deep, steady, unshakable joy of being alive. Being here. Being you. You find yourself laughing more. You forgive faster. You let go easier. You walk softer on the earth. You thank your coffee. You bless your food. You speak to your houseplants like old friends. You start treating your body like it's sacred, not because you fear death, but because you honor life. And when people ask what you've been doing differently, you can't quite explain. Because how do you describe the miracle of just being here? Fully, unapologetically, quietly, alive, and still, a part of you watches all of this unfold with wonder. Because 5 years ago, or 10, or 20, you were drowning in patterns. You were terrified of being seen. You thought peace was for other people. You thought awakening was something reserved for gurus and monks. And now, you're here, cooking dinner, texting your friends, walking the dog, and feeling the pulse of the divine in every second. There's a quiet shift in how you relate to the world, once you've crossed through that invisible door. The one where spiritual awakening ends and something more rooted begins. You don't just think differently, you walk differently. Your footsteps carry a different weight, a kind of gravity that's hard to explain. You aren't heavy with emotion, nor light with escape. You're present, that's all. And that presence turns out to be far more transformative than any revelation you had while riding the high of awakening. You start to feel time differently, not as something that's slipping away, not as a thief, but as a space to exist in. You're not racing anymore. You're not measuring your value in milestones. You wake up, breathe, stretch, and for once in your life, that feels like enough. You don't need to plan the entire week before your feet touch the floor. You don't need to check notifications before checking in with yourself. You don't panic in silence. You let it hold you. This shift changes your relationship with achievement. You used to chase goals with a tight chest and a clenched jaw. Now goals still exist, but they're softer. They come from a different place. Not a need to prove, but a desire to express. You no longer need success to fill a hole inside you. You create because you want to, because it's your nature to move, to contribute, to sculpt something beautiful out of your hours. And this changes the way you work. You stop pushing. You start flowing. You stop hustling. You start listening. You take breaks before you collapse. You set boundaries not to be difficult, but to be true. You say no to the opportunity that doesn't resonate, even if it pays well. You say yes to the invitation that feels aligned, even if it scares you. You stop needing to be the best. You just want to be honest. And people start noticing. They might not know what's different about you, but they feel it. You're not performing confidence anymore, you are it. You're not asserting your truth with force, it simply radiates from you. You're not trying to be likable, lovable, or successful. And that's what makes you magnetic. That's what makes you safe. That's what makes people want to be around you. But here's the strangest part. Not everyone will be comfortable with this new version of you. Because you've stopped playing roles. You've stopped being predictable. You've stopped giving people what they want if it doesn't match what you are. And people who were attached to who you used to be may begin to pull away. Not always with malice, sometimes with confusion, sometimes with resistance, sometimes with silence. It's not rejection, it's recalibration. The frequency you now live in doesn't resonate with all the same notes. You begin to see this clearly, and it hurts, but it also liberates you, because you realize how much of your life was built on keeping people comfortable, on being the version of yourself that caused the least disruption, on dimming, shrinking, contorting, just to be allowed in the room. And now, you're no longer asking for permission. You're no longer performing your belonging. You simply belong first and foremost to yourself. This doesn't mean you become cold. Quite the opposite. You become more open, more generous, more real. But you don't leak your energy where it's not valued. You don't over-explain your choices. You don't apologize for your growth. You stop expecting others to clap when you rise. Because you're not doing it for applause. You're doing it because the old self was too small to carry your truth. And so, as you continue in this phase, this post-awakening embodiment, you begin to explore a different kind of relationship with the unknown. You stop needing certainty. You stop needing a 5-year plan. You don't panic when life changes course. You don't see endings as failures. You begin to trust that what leaves is clearing space. You begin to trust that the silence isn't absence, it's alignment. You begin to trust that if nothing's happening right now, it's because something deeper is. And this trust, it's not passive, it's fierce. It's the kind of trust that makes you move even when you're scared. That makes you rest even when the world says hustle. That makes you stay even when your fear says run. You've stopped outsourcing your faith to fortune tellers, card readers, or algorithms. Not because those things are bad, but because you've found something more accurate. Your own knowing. You feel it in your gut, in your chest, in your dreams. You don't always know why you're being guided in a certain direction. You just know you are.
No gentle layer to cradle a jawline that has grown lighter with time.
Because peace is no longer the absence of chaos. It's the presence of alignment. And alignment feels like ease, not comfort, but ease. You're no longer addicted to struggle. You're no longer impressed by difficulty. You're no longer proving your worth by how much pain you can tolerate. You're not waiting for life to finally give you a break. You are the break. You create it, you claim it. And that claiming, it transforms everything. You stop asking, what if it doesn't work out? And start asking, what if it does? You stop expecting pain around every corner. You stop assuming joy will be taken from you. You stop bracing for impact. You stop holding your breath. You start breathing again, fully, consciously, like someone who no longer fears what comes next. You start noticing that when things fall apart, you don't fall apart with them. You start noticing that when something ends, something truer always begins. You start noticing that the more you soften, the more life meets you. You begin dancing with it again, not just through practices, but through moments. Washing dishes becomes meditation. Hugging a friend becomes communion. Looking in the mirror becomes a prayer. And all the parts of you that once felt fragmented, your inner child, your wounded protector, your lost dreamer, your scared lover, they begin to circle back. Not to take over, but to integrate, to rejoin the whole, to bring their wisdom, to bring their softness, to bring you back to yourself. Not in pieces, but in power. Because now, you're not running anymore. You're not hiding anymore. You're not fixing anymore. You're living with your eyes open, living with your heart soft, living with your soul anchored. And that, in the end, is the gift that awakening gave you, not a new identity, but the courage to be without one. Not more knowledge, but more trust. Not a perfect self, but a present one. And that presence, it's everything. Eventually, the line between spiritual and ordinary dissolves completely. You don't need to light incense to feel connected. You don't need to chant or meditate for an hour or journal your gratitude to feel grateful. You might still do those things, not out of obligation or discipline, but because they bring you peace. But if you skip them, if the morning gets messy, if your routine is interrupted, if life pulls you into chaos for a moment, you don't crumble. You don't feel like you've fallen off some sacred path. Because the sacred isn't in the routine. It's in you. You've become the altar. This doesn't mean life gets easy, but it becomes clear. You can feel when something is off now, not just in your thoughts, but in your body. A conversation that drains you, a place that feels heavy, a plan that looked good on paper but suddenly feels misaligned. You don't always know why it feels wrong, but you trust it enough to pause, to listen, to wait. Your intuition used to be a whisper you doubted. Now it's the compass you follow without needing proof. And while this clarity is powerful, it's also quiet. You're not walking into rooms trying to vibe check people or read their energy to feel safe. You are the safety. You don't scan the room anymore, you hold your ground. You don't adapt your personality for approval. You sit in your center, and people feel that. Some will be drawn to you magnetically. Some will be triggered by your presence. But either way, you're no longer available for relationships that pull you away from yourself. You stop overgiving. You stop under-receiving. You stop shrinking. You stop chasing. You stop tolerating inconsistency. You've grown tired of loving people into their potential, of seeing the best in others at the expense of seeing what's right in front of you, of pouring into people who can't even hold space for your truth. It's not that you've become cynical. You've just become clear. You love deeply, but not blindly. You forgive, but you remember. You open your heart, but with discernment. And that discernment doesn't make you guarded, it makes you rooted. It's the difference between being available and being accessible. You're no longer accessible to chaos, to manipulation, to people who confuse your softness with naivety, to cycles you've already healed from. Because now, love has to feel like truth. Not fantasy, not performance, not convenience. Truth. You're not looking for perfection. You're looking for resonance, for relational integrity, for someone who can sit in silence without filling it with ego, for someone whose nervous system speaks the same language as yours. And if that kind of love hasn't arrived yet, you're not aching for it like before. You're living in such alignment that you trust it will find you if and only if it's meant to. You're not trying to manifest it. You're not trying to heal fast enough to deserve it. You're just being, and in that being, you become deeply self-sourced. Your joy doesn't come from what someone else gives you. It comes from how you meet yourself. You laugh alone in your kitchen. You cry in the shower and it feels like release, not despair. You walk in nature and feel held. You listen to music, and your entire body becomes an instrument. You realize that this is the frequency you used to chase, and now you're living in it, not as a moment, as a home. And in that home, you begin to create, not for validation, not to go viral, not to prove your worth, but because creation is your nature. You write because your truth wants a voice. You dance because your body wants to celebrate. You speak because silence no longer feels like hiding. You express because you've finally removed the armor that kept you from your own light. And light, it's no longer something you reach for. It's what you radiate, even in grief, even in uncertainty, even when life throws you back into the unknown. You no longer collapse. You respond, not with control, but with presence, because presence has become your practice. And it's in presence that you remember who you really are, not the roles, not the trauma, not the stories others gave you. Just this breath, just this body, just this now. This is how you move through the world now, not seeking power, but inhabiting it. And this power isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need applause. It walks quietly. It sees clearly. It listens deeply. And when necessary, it roars not to dominate, but to protect what is sacred. Because now, you are sacred to yourself. You no longer abandon your needs to avoid conflict. You no longer betray your boundaries to feel loved. You no longer dim your light to avoid making others uncomfortable. You've realized that shrinking to be digestible only leaves you starving. So you let yourself be full now, fully expressed, Fully human, fully here. And the beauty of it all? You're not trying to be anyone's version of healed. You've stopped performing enlightenment. You've stopped editing your emotions to fit a narrative. You've stopped seeking a final destination. You've started living, fully, imperfectly. Honestly, and that honesty, that's what people feel when they're around you. Not a curated brand, not a perfect aesthetic, but a human being who has sat with their shadow long enough to recognize their light, who has stopped seeking to be chosen and has chosen themselves, who no longer needs to be impressive, only true. And when people ask what happened to you, you smile. Because there's no elevator pitch for embodiment. You can't wrap it in a quote. You can't market it in a 5-step plan. You can only live it, every day, in every choice, in every breath. Not because it's glamorous, because it's real. And real is rare. And rare is needed, now more than ever.